Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the L. Ron Hubbard Theater in Hollywood, California. Tonight we present a live broadcast of the Golden Age Radio Hour featuring L. Ron Hubbard's detective story, Dead Men Killed. In a voice which held the icy tones of death, the dark-clothed man in the doorway opened, rasped,
"I have come to kill you, Gordon. I have come to kill you."
Jackson?
The killer's eyes were glassy. His hands reached out before him, grasping, talon-like. The pallor of the dead was on his wasted face. He was clothed in the garments of the grave. Silently, relentlessly, he walked forward.
Stop! My God, Jackson! What have I ever done to you?
I have come to kill you, Gordon.
The clutching hands came closer. Gordon cowered. He covered his face, tried to cower away. Beside him was a telephone. Furtively, he reached for it.
Police!
If Jackson heard, he gave no sign. His hard, glassy eyes, sunken and horrible, were fixed on the victim's throat. Gordon caught the odor. It was the smell of moist earth mingled with the perfumes of the undertaking parlor. The stench of the grave.
I have come to kill you, Gordon.
My God, Jackson, get away!
Too late. Gordon tried to scramble out from behind his desk. Jackson lunged, hands convulsing. When the sunken eyes were a foot away from Gordon's, the fingers snapped down on the victim's throat. There was a shriek and the crash of the overturned chair. Gordon whipped about, writhing under the mechanical and maniacal strength of the hands. Shuddering sobs were coming from the victim's distorted mouth. Slowly, the body under the hands relaxed and lay still. Jackson's fingers still clutched at the throat. Seconds ticked by before the murderer moved. Then, with his expressionless face turned toward the door, he walked slowly from the room. Inspector Levkoff rushed from his desk into the squad room and spotted Detective Sergeant Terry Lane.
Lane, snap into it. Gordon's been murdered, and I think it's a clue on your Burnham killing. The man on the switchboard heard Gordon shout, "My God, Jackson, get away," into the phone. Get out there right away.
Like a shot, Detective Sergeant Terrence Lane hurtled through the door, plunged down a flight of steps, swung aboard the scout car at the curb.
The Gordon residence, and step on it.
If Detective Lane was disheveled, he had good reason to be. For a week, he had been on the trail of a killer he could never reasonably expect to apprehend. Since that fatal day 7 days before when Edward Burnham, head of a power trust, had found dead in his home, Lane's life had been a nightmare. He had not known which way to turn, since the only conceivable clue pointed the guilt to Hamilton, secretary to Burnham, and that was impossible, for Hamilton had been dead and buried for 2 weeks. Lane sprinted up the steps, kicked open the front door, and stepped inside. Worry flickered across his face, and he looked down at his feet. There in the center of the hallway lay a blue-gray cotton glove. When he picked it up, Lane again smelled that faint odor. Suddenly he recognized it. It was a pallbearer's glove, and from it came the stench of moist earth and sickening perfume, the odor of the grave. Jamming his first clue into his pocket, Lane ran into the room at his right and then stopped abruptly. Gordon was sprawled on the floor, rigid and staring. His once dapper clothes were ripped about the throat. The flesh beneath his jaw was blue and swollen. Lane stepped forward with a shudder. From the street came this noise of sirens and screeching brakes, heralding the arrival of the wagon and the coroner. The coroner was the first man in the door. Dr. Charles Reynolds was entirely too professional to be awed by the sight of a corpse.
Hello. Well, I don't need my stethoscope to tell me that bird's stone dead.
Deader in hell. Strangled. The fellow that did it must have been a maniac.
Just the same thing as the Burnham case. Any clue?
Nothing definite. Wish there was.
He looked up to see that 4 bluecoats had come in.
Go about your business routine, boys. I'm afraid it won't mean a thing.
One of the men came in, herding a scared maid in front of him. Lane gave the maid a brief scrutiny.
Who was Jackson?
I don't know anything about it, sir. Jackson, sir, he was Mr. Gordon's secretary. He was buried last week, sir.
Oh, cripes. Another one of those things? What did Jackson die of?
I don't rightly know, sir, but it was some sort of fever. There wasn't nothing between Jackson and Mr. Gordon, sir. Jackson was a mighty fine young man. When he died, sir, we felt very bad.
Oh, and we're supposed to believe Jackson rose up from the grave and killed Gordon. Zombies. The Walking Dead. Like they're supposed to have in Haiti. Well, it's rot. I've been there. I never saw any.
I'll handle this, Reynolds.
Lane drew the pallbearer's glove out of his pocket and thumped it in front of the maid's nose.
You ever seen this before?
Yes, sir. That is, I think so, sir. I bought those gloves very special for Mr. Jackson's funeral.
Well, then you wore this glove as a pallbearer?
No, sir. I bought it for Mr. Jackson, sir. He had a very large hand, he did. That was on him when we buried him, sir, in the grave.
What? Well, I'll say this much, Lane. The man that strangled Gordon had very large hands. The thumbprints say so. Well, there's nothing else I can do now.
He picked up his black bag, and the door closed after him as he disappeared in the hall.
You say that Gordon liked Jackson.
Yes, sir. All of us did, sir.
The door opened again, and a small, severely dressed gentleman came in. He was Dr. Anton Kaler, who sometimes interested himself in crime, though his professions were chemistry and traveling.
Hello, Kaler. How'd you get in?
I told the officer at the door I was a friend of yours.
I'm glad you happened along. Maybe you can give me a hand with this thing.
But certainly, I saw the police cars and I thought I might be of help. You see, I know Gordon quite well. Or rather, I did know him well.
There was a step outside, and Reynolds stepped briskly back into the room.
Forgot my gloves.
He leaned beside the body and picked up a pair of gloves. The light from the windows danced on the odd snake-shaped emerald in the ring he wore.
You like to stick around? Dr. Kaler here may be able to give us a different slant on this thing.
Oh.
But Dr. Kaler, this is Dr. Reynolds, the coroner. This is another one of those cases. A fellow by the name of Jackson murdered Gordon. Now, did you know his secretary, Jackson?
Why, yes, he was quite a personable young chap. He died last week, you know. I attended his funeral. Poor devil, you certainly didn't deserve this.
The detective sergeant took a turn about the room and then came back to the door. There beside the wall was a scrap of paper which had escaped his first examination. He picked it up idly.
What the devil? This is a pharmacy bill from Port-au-Prince, Haiti. What could this be doing here?
Well, it says that it hereby renders the account of Dr. LaRue to date. My lord, the thing's made out for 50,000 gourds. Why, that's $10,000 in our money.
$10,000? Whoever heard of pharmacies charging $10,000 for anything? Dr. LaRue, huh? Well, if this LaRue's got anything to do with this killing, he'll be spilling the beans by dark.
Oh, never heard of a Dr. LaRue in this city.
May I see it for a moment? I've spent considerable time in Haiti, you know.
There you go.
Well, if you want my opinion, Lane, I don't think this has much connection with the murder. This pharmacy is a pretty reliable one in Port-au-Prince. Probably Gordon had some dealings with the man there. You know, he's traveled, or rather, did travel, quite a little.
It may be funny, but I've got a hunch that this has some bearing on this case.
He walked quickly to the entrance of the room and then stopped as though he had been smashed in the face. There, on the inside of the door, where he could not have seen it before, was a note. The paper was held up by a knife driven through its flap. The hilt of the weapon was also green and was carved in the semblance of a snake. Lane ripped it down, shoved the knife in his pocket, and read the message.
Terry Lane, you will immediately leave this case and resign from the force. If not, you will be killed as suddenly, as unexpectedly, and as horribly as either Burnham or Gordon.
The signature was also in green. The 2 words at the bottom left no clue to the writer's identity. Luke Garou. The detective choked and whirled to see that the policeman Reynolds and Kaler were all staring at him. He smiled thinly, shrugged, and went out of the house with the missive in his coat pocket. On the steps were newspapermen, and at Lane's appearance, a barrage of questions ripped through the air.
Was it the same as Burnham?
If Jackson's been dead a week, how could he possibly murder Gordon?
Who do you suspect?
Lane was on the sidewalk trying to worm his way through the gathering crowd. Hands tore at him. People stared in his direction. Cameras snapped hungrily. One hand in particular was insistent. Lane gazed back at its owner with annoyance. And then his annoyance faded, for the owner of the white hand was a vividly beautiful girl. In spite of his worries, Lane stopped abruptly, satisfied for the moment just to fill his eyes with his vision. About him, people snickered, and he quickly plunged on, dragging the girl with him until they stood a good 100 feet away from the nearest of the morbid crowd.
You have something you want to say to me?
Yes, but this isn't the place.
Come on to headquarters with me.
He turned quickly to hail a cruising cab, and when it had stopped, Lane said,
Let's get going, miss.
He reached back for the girl's arm to help her into the machine, and then he stopped and stared quickly about him. But the girl was gone. On Detective Sergeant Lane's desk, there lay a weird assortment of articles. First, there was the blue-gray glove. Next came the Haitian pharmacy bill, and then there were the note and the knife with a snake handle.
But, Inspector, if I can't open the grave, how the devil do I know whether this guy Jackson is still buried?
It's your case.
Yeah, I know, but how about a little cooperation? I've been trying to connect with Jackson's family. I can't exhume the body without an order.
Lane picked up the note he had found on the door.
And as for this thing, how the devil could it get there? Now, whoever wrote that, they think that I'm on the case and that I've got evidence.
Did you find out what that signature Luke Garou means?
Yeah, it means the human hyena. Is that gruesome enough for you? Part of a voodoo fetish. One of the priests or something in a black magic cult.
Well, if you can't do anything but sit there and twiddle your thumbs, I would take that note's advice and resign.
Yeah, I suppose you would. I can't seem to set my teeth into anything. There's this business of a green serpent and a human hyena or wolf, and then next comes LaRue, who can't be located. The only way I can find out if dead men are really coming back to life and killing is by digging up Jackson. And you won't let me do that. All right, I'm no ghoul, and I didn't think I'd ever dig graves, but order or no order, I'm going to exhume Jackson. If I'm caught, well, what the devil? Couldn't be worse.
The cemetery was ringed by giant weeping willow trees, which swayed under the almost ghostly moan of the night wind. A shiver ran up Lane's spine, but he straightened his shoulders, hefted shovel and pick.
Whatever teeth that note might have had, they'll sink now, if ever.
He looked about him across the dead white array of marble rows, and then began the task of finding Jackson's grave. One by one, he inspected the stones, careful not to tread upon the mounds.
William Jackson, by his ever-loving sister.
Lane stared about him, and then with a sigh of repulsion, sank his pick into the mound. And at last, his shovel scraped against metal. Redoubling his efforts, he undermined the casket until he could stand to one side. Lane wrapped his grimy fist about half of his flashlight and pried up the outer lid of the casket. The coffin was empty. Lane froze with horror, and he felt the dread premonition of a presence. He whirled suddenly, stepped to one side. The icy beam of his light bit upward through the sky and lit up the ghastly face of a dead man. There was no mistake. Lane knew that the man was a corpse. The lips moved slowly. The voice was harsh but toneless.
I have come to kill you, Lane.
Lane braced himself for a spring upward and felt tentatively for his gun. Then he writhed inwardly as he realized that he had left it with his coat on the top of the ground. Ah, what a fool he was. Again, the detective was about to leap up when he caught sight of another movement to the right. He changed the beam of his light, and there again was the expressionless face of a corpse. Lane felt his blood freeze in his veins as he realized his peril. A man dressed in the black of the grave was about to take his life. He lunged for the legs of the man. The figure reeled back, dragging Terry out of the grave. The detective let go. He rolled to one side. He tried to scramble to his feet, but like a maniac, the man was down upon him, pinning him down. Lane caught a glimpse of an expressionless face and saw grasping hands reach out for his throat. He struck out savagely, and his fist thudded against clammy flesh. The man's expression did not change. He didn't reel. The hands came closer, but before he could recover himself, he sensed another presence. He tried to spin about, but he was too late. Icy, bony fingers were closing about his windpipe with a strength which was demoniacal. Then, a harsh voice cut through the night, an ugly, snarling voice.
Drop him! Drop him! Drop him!
The man backed away. The fingers about Lane's windpipe relaxed and allowed him to sink down to the sod. He gasped hoarsely for breath, unable for the moment to offer further resistance. Dimly, he saw a man approaching. Lane almost welcomed his appearance, for he knew that the man was alive and human. Staccato orders were snapped.
Take him to the car.
And then the man bent down, and before Lane could move, he grabbed him with his clammy hand and led him away toward the rusty gates of the cemetery. After an interval of several minutes, the group approached a black limousine which was parked on the side of the road. The lithe one rasped an order.
Drop him!
And Lane was dropped to the gravel. The man who had led him backed away, staring straight ahead out of sightless eyes. The car door opened suddenly, flooding the roadside with a strange, greenish light which blended with that of the moon.
Get in. Don't try to get away. I have you covered. Those dead men would be only too glad to track you down if you tried to escape.
Lane blinked at the light. He climbed stiffly to his feet, shrugged, and stepped inside the car. A man clad in black cape and hat sat on the far side of the limousine. The man's face was entirely obscured by a green mask. The car's occupant thrust an automatic savagely into Lane's side. Still, he thought, hot lead was by far preferable to the eternity at the hands of dead men.
You found Jackson gone?
Yeah, seems to have walked out on us. Have I the doubtful honor of talking with Loop Guru?
You have.
The human hyena, huh? So I have something you want?
Quite right. You have a certain pharmacy bill addressed to a Dr. LaRue of this city. I must have that bill.
The last sentence was harshly punctuated by a thrust of the automatic muzzle deeper into the detective's side.
And after you get that?
Well, who knows? The other part of my bargain is your resignation from the force.
I see. You don't want to kill me right away. You'd rather have me resign so you can pin something on me and kill me afterwards.
I want the pharmacy bill, Lane. As far as killing goes, I don't care when you die.
Loop Guru paused to see what effect his last had had on the detective, but if he looked for fright, he was mistaken.
Oh, well, you can buy your life with the bill and your resignation. I want the bill now.
Lane shrugged bleakly, sudden hopelessness on his face. Slowly, he reached back toward his hip pocket, as though searching for the required slip of paper. The automatic tightened against him. Cautiously, he leaned even harder against the weapon's barrel. Then, as swiftly as a striking snake, he snatched at Loop Guru's wrist. Instead of pushing the gun away from him, he pulled it toward him. Loop Guru pulled the trigger, not realizing that the slide had been pushed back and that the firing pin would never touch the cartridge. Lane smiled brittlely. He drew back his right fist and swung it straight for the masked one's jaw. Loop Guru struggled for an instant. He pulled the gun back and again pressed the trigger. Flame stabbed into Lane's side. Then his fist came back and traveled a second short arc to the masked one's jaw. A bellow of rage came as Loup Garou sank unconscious to the floor. Swiftly, he plunged for the driver's seat. A bullet from the outside shattered the glass beside his head. It seemed an age before he found the switch and an eternity before the car's motor barked into life. A hard grin of victory was on Lane's face as he saw the long, moonlit road unwinding ahead. He turned to make sure of his captive. Then when he turned, Lane's grin faded. The car's door was swinging open and the back seat was empty. Dr. Reynolds pulled at his short briar pipe and gave Terry Lane a judicial look.
Well, you needn't worry about those powder burns on your side. They'll heal up in a day or so. Well, maybe a week. Did you get anything in return for it?
That's what I want to know.
Snapped Inspector Levkoff from the doorway of Lane's office.
I found out that the car that was swiped and registered under the name of Dr. LaRue. I found that Jackson's grave is empty. And I know that that Haitian pharmacy bill is worth something. Isn't that about enough for one night's work?
You rob a grave, steal a car, get shot up, and lose your arrest. That's successful, I suppose.
Now say, listen.
Now, he doesn't mean anything by it, Terry.
And then with the doctor's license, he added,
Be nice to him. I just noticed the other day that his blood pressure is way up. He'll be popping off on us any minute.
Yeah? Why, old fussel? Take your phone, Terry.
Lane picked up the instrument, faintly bored. He spoke for a moment and then sat bolt upright.
When? This afternoon at 3? Yes, sir. Mr. Morton. We'll be there.
He whirled on Levkoff.
Morton's secretary just died.
You mean Morton, the banker?
Yes, Morton, the banker. His secretary, the private one, well, he's had a fever for a few days and now he's dead. Morton received an extortion note a few days ago and he refused to listen to it. Told the gang he was too broke.
Morton broke. What else?
He wants Reynolds and me to come to the funeral and make sure that Kramer, the secretary, is really dead. This looks like the Loup Garou all over again.
And Lane regarded the knife on his desk with its snake handle.
If Morton's killed, I'm going to string both of you up to the nearest telephone pole. Get me? The newspapers will have this thing on the streets inside an hour. If you slip up, it means both our jobs. If Kramer isn't dead, by God, Reynolds, fix him up so there won't be enough of him to walk. Get me?
Well, when I leave that place, believe me, Kramer will be permanently dead.
The funeral procession, which was lined up at the door of the undertaking establishment, was long. It was evident that Kramer had many friends and that Morton, in spite of his terror, was making an occasion out of it.
Is that undertaker reliable?
I reckon so. He's the biggest in town. Let's wander over and see Galt, the undertaker.
They walked through the throng on the sidewalk. The detective followed Reynolds up the steps of the building and then stopped abruptly. There, beside the rail, was the girl who had disappeared after the Gordon murder. She was looking straight into the detective's eyes, and he felt a giddy sensation in the top of his head. She stepped up to him quickly.
I want to see you after you come out. It's a matter of greatest importance. I don't dare be seen talking to you.
Then she turned and hurried away before he could say anything. Lane found the coroner near the door. Galt, the undertaker, replete in afternoon formal clothes, met them as he stepped inside.
And what is it, gentlemen? You're friends of the unfortunate deceased?
Lane flipped open his coat and displayed his badge. He gazed narrowly at Galt and saw that the man had glanced furtively to the right and left.
We want to inspect the corpse.
But certainly. Step right this way, gentlemen. Mr. Kramer is laying in state.
He quickly led the way to the side of the coffin. The detective gazed down at the dead face of Kramer and failed to repress a shudder. Perhaps in a short time, Kramer would be one of the walking dead.
Of course. If the police wishes to inspect, who am I to stop him?
He pulled up the lid and began to unbutton Kramer's shirt front. The coroner pulled a heavy stethoscope from his pocket and hooked it into his ears to press it against the dead man's heart. He finally shrugged.
No doubt about it, Terry. This is one of the deadest stiffs I've ever seen.
Hey, you took care of Hamilton and Jackson.
Yes. I may add, the largest undertaking business in town.
Well, get along with your undertaking. And be darn sure that you bury Kramer good and deep. Get me?
But Galt was not permitted a chance to answer. The chattering snarl of a machine gun bit through the hum of the crowd. The piercing screams of bullet-hacked people split the air. Lane raced for the entrance, knocking aside the surging, panic-stricken crowd. He paused on the steps and looked out into the street. Horror spread over his face. At the other curb, sprawled in his scout car, was Police Officer Monahan. His face was shot away, splattered with his lifeblood. The detective threw off the horror which had momentarily swept over him. From the steps, he looked at the wrecked squad car. Lane nodded at his men.
Clear that up. Check on the gun and the ballistics.
The detective moved with leaden feet across the asphalt to the side of the wrecked squad car and stood for some seconds quietly regarding it. The coroner had followed and stood nearby, silently watching the grim scene. Then, once again, Lane stiffened and stared. Pinned on Monahan's chest was a note addressed to Terry Lane, and it was written in green ink.
Terry Lane. Just a hint that I want that bill. Get off this case or else... Loop Guru.
The crowd, morbid and shuddering, was drawing in toward the wreck. Impatiently, Lane tried to sweep them back, pocketing the note as he did so. Bluecoats were coming up while the plainclothesmen worked. Then he caught a glimpse of a familiar figure. Dr. Anton Kaler was on the edge of the crowd, leaning on his cane, surveying the wreck with a judicial eye. Lane moved toward him.
Sort of scooped you, didn't they? Oh, it's ugly work.
Yeah, this is one swell mess. Listen, Doc, I want to ask a favor of you. You know something about Haiti, don't you?
A little.
Well, I want you to check up on this pharmacy's bill for me. Will you?
Certainly. Glad to be of any help I can. You've learned that, haven't you?
Of course, Doc. Oh, and I want you to check up on...
Wait a minute. Let one thing ooze through my poor brain at a time. Will you... first of all, where's the bill so that I can get the address?
Here's a photostat of the original.
Okay, now what else?
I want you to check up on black magic for me.
You don't expect a chemist of my standing to believe in anything like that, do you?
No, but seriously, I want to know about the green serpent and the human hyena that steals people for sacrifice, and just how far voodoo magic can run.
All right.
Will you?
All right. I'll delve through the wee hours and get you the works. That all?
That's all for now. I'll be seeing you.
And Lane moved back to the crowd, remembering suddenly that he had promised to meet the girl. He walked down past the line of cars, which were still drawn up for the funeral. A low voice came to him, and then he saw the door of a gray, custom-built sedan swing open, and a slim arm beckoned to him. People were all about him, and he trusted their very number to hide his movements. It was evident that the girl wanted secrecy. Quickly, the detective stepped into the machine and slammed the door behind him.
I've waited long to talk with you. My name is Dawn Drayden, and I'm one of the entertainers at the Club Haitian. I've wanted to talk to you about these crimes. Do you have any proof of the identity of these murderers? Is it a fact that dead men are actually coming back from the grave and killing their employers?
Yes. Dead men are doing the killing.
He looked out through the curtain and saw that the procession was starting off. The chauffeur of the gray sedan was putting their machine in motion. The girl glanced quickly about and then looked back at Lane.
I've wanted to give you some tips. Perhaps you can use them. Morton is next on the docket. He'll be dead by tomorrow.
You interest me, but if you pardon my saying, I've got a hunch that I'm playing with dynamite.
What do you mean?
Well, to put it bluntly, I expect to run up against Loop Guru within the next few minutes, and if I do, it's going to be a showdown.
You mean you think that
That you're on the inside? I figure you're probably next to LaRue. You're spilling this to me just for a play, aren't you?
Annoyance flashed across the girl's beautiful face, and she came so close to Lane that he again received a whiff of the perfume.
Don't get me wrong, Mr. Lane. If the truth were known, I'm the only one that can pull you out of an awfully deep mire. When all this thing is over, I'm only going to ask one thing, and you're to grant that favor first.
I don't like the idea of promising anything rash.
This won't be anything rash. It's something fine and humane. I'm only afraid that you will be blind to it after I finish this case. I'll help you to the limit if you grant that favor, sight unseen, now.
All right. It's granted. Sight unseen. Now, do you have something else?
It's necessary that you take this Dr. LaRue alive. Otherwise, you'll never be able to prove his identity or grant me my favor. You have a difficult task before you. It so happens that Lou Garou thinks that you have evidence of his identity, or that you can trace him. I don't know about that. At any cost, he's going to remove you from his path.
You mean he'll blast me?
No, nothing as crude as machine gunning. It would be something very subtle and delicate, like torture. But there's one thing you must be careful to remember. Do not...
A hard crash broke the comparative silence about them. For an instant, Terry thought it was a backfire of a car, and then he knew he was wrong. The driver of the gray sedan pitched sideways on the front seat, blood spurting from a hole in the side of his head. Dawn Drayton opened her carmine mouth to scream, but no sound came forth. Before Lane could reach for his gun, two things happened. A man slipped in under the wheel. The car door swung open, and a man with a black coat and hat stepped in from the machine which had come up beside them. The intruder looked up a moment before his face. His face had been obscured by his hat, but now he brought to view a green mask.
Don't move.
Calmly, he shut the door. His eyes glittered from the slits of his mask. Lane silently cursed himself for not having been on his guard against such a move.
Nice work, Don. I'll remember you in my next paycheck.
Lane shot a horrified sideways glance at the girl. A sardonic smile scarred her beauty. That it was true that she was in the pay of this fiend. The detective knew that he had been duped into a very clever trap.
It isn't every detective who has the privilege of knowing beforehand who commits a murder. You see, Lane, Morton will be dead before sunrise.
Go on. You interest me.
You know, Lane, it isn't every man that gets a chance to converse with the dead.
Meaning?
Ooh, well, what do you think?
I suppose you want me to think that you're dead too. Nice idea.
Well, before we were so rudely interrupted last night, we were talking about a pharmacy bill. You gave a photostat to a chemist. You asked him to check up on it. Evidently, you do not know the secret. I want that bill and all the other photostats.
Lane said nothing. His silence shouted a negative.
Then I shall have to take you to a certain place I have in mind. Incidentally, Lane, the chemist will be waylaid tonight and robbed. You can't count on that copy.
Dawn Drayton stared straight in front of her, still smiling, as though faintly amused by the proceedings. Lane's blue eyes narrowed with disgust as he looked at her. The detective was thinking rapidly, trying to piece out a case and devise a method of escape at the same time.
If you look out the window, you'll find that night has fallen. Perhaps that will make you understand that there is little hope to rescue for you.
Before he thought twice, Lane pulled aside the curtain absently and glanced out. Luke Garou leaned swiftly forward and reversed the gun in his hand, holding it by the muzzle. The gun butt came up and then lanced down to thud solidly against Lane's head. Slowly, Lane sank forward, jolting under the motion of the car. Luke Garou eyed the body speculatively and then swooped down and quickly retrieved the papers in Lane's coat. From the pack, he extracted the original of the pharmacy bill and 2 photostats. He shrugged again and turned the gun around until it pointed at Lane's head. The finger closed down on the trigger.
Don't!
Why not?
I couldn't stand it. Haven't you killed enough men for one day? The chauffeur, that woman, and the officer, aren't they enough?
What's one man, more or less?
You might at least use him.
Oh. You have brains after all, haven't you? Why, if I use Lane, I'll throw the entire force into a panic. That's capital. I can kill him and have him buried, and he can kill Levkov.
You'll know my worth yet, Dr. LaRue.
Motionless on his back, Detective Sergeant Lane lay and stared into the dark. He did not know how long he had been there or where he might be. He realized suddenly that he lay on some sort of operating table. He sat up, feeling the ache of his whole body. He knew that the sound had been going on for some time, but not until now had it forced itself on his attention. It was the low reverberations of a drum, quick but sinister and ominous. It called to mind savage rites, grisly cannibalistic feasts. Another sound became recognizable. It was that of human voices. Listening intently, they made out two distinct tones. One was harsh, the other one was lifeless and dull.
I have come to kill you, Morden. I have come to kill you, Morden.
Lane's heartbeat quickened, and the muscles of his lean jaw throbbed. Here was something which was understandable, and in it perhaps he would find the answer to the entire gruesome mystery. He slid off the operating table and stepped in the direction of the sound. It was not until then that he saw the streak of greenish light which came from under the door and through a keyhole. As he moved, the voices came much louder.
I have come to kill you, Morden.
Lane cautiously tried the door and found it locked. He knelt silently, placed his eye at the keyhole. In front of his gaze, naked in the greenish light, was a small table. Lane shifted his eye and saw the lithe individual of past acquaintance. The detective moved again. It was all he could do to repress the gasp of horror which sprang to his lips. There, dressed as he had been that afternoon, was Kramer. Morton's secretary sat staring straight before him with dead, unfocused eyes. The sockets seemed lidless and sunken. The entire posture of the body was without resilience.
I have come to kill you, Morden. I have come to kill you, Morden.
Lane stood up and stepped back to hurl his weight against the door. He drew a deep breath, tensed himself for the shock, and the room gradually lit up with a greenish light.
I wouldn't if I were you.
From across the room, the eyes behind the green mask were terrifying. The detective glanced at the poised gun in LaRue's hand, looked at the operating table and the rows of instruments, and decided to choose the lesser of two evils. He sprang against the panel. Simultaneous with the lunge, Loup-Garou sprang across the room, gun butt up on high. Before Lane could whirl, the cold steel had arced down in a deadly shimmer of light. Lane sagged limply and then sprawled out at full length. In an instant, the detective lay once more on the operating table. Loup-Garou's hands moved nervously, and Lane was securely lashed to the white surface. The door which Loup-Garou had used was opened, and Dawn Drayton slipped into the room.
Going to carry it out, LaRue?
I don't know. I'll kill him first and decide later. Prepare the slow-acting poison, will you?
LaRue picked up a basin of water and threw it forcefully over Terry's face.
That ought to bring the fool around.
That is, if you can ever wake up a flatfoot.
She was busy at a side table with a nickel-plated syringe, laughing. Lane came to quickly and tried to rise. He sank back when he felt the weight of the ropes and gave Loup-Garou a fixed stare.
So, you're still here, huh? Why the devil don't you just kill me and get it over with?
Oh, you won't have long to wait, Lane. Oh, and thanks for the bill. My men have just delivered the other mimeograph. Your friend, the chemist, is lying unconscious in an alley. That is, he may be unconscious. Perhaps he's dead.
Lane writhed and then subsided. Poor Kaler. Just because he had been asked to do a favor.
I have a little surprise for you. I'm thinking of having you murder Levkov and perhaps Reynolds. How does that strike you?
If you think you can hire me,
Oh, no. I see you've got me wrong. I meant, well, you saw Kramer in the other room, didn't you? How would you like to be like Kramer?
Lane looked wildly about him and caught sight of Dawn Drayton. He gave her an unbelieving stare and then fell back.
if you're gonna kill me, why don't you just do it?
Oh, anxious to meet the devil, aren't you? You will, soon enough. Got that syringe ready, Dawn?
Coming, LaRue.
See this? It has a poison in it, which will take effect in half an hour.
He felt of the long, sharp needle.
Oh, it's not likely that it will fail. It never has.
Lane looked fixedly at the hideous nickel barrel and the ugly, sharp point.
Just for your interest. Oh, everything seems to interest you, Lane. I might add that
Spare me the elocution, LaRue, or Loop Guru, whatever you call yourself. Get it over with.
I might add that your body will be decently and publicly buried. You'll be found murdered on the street in front of headquarters. They'll know that you're dead. 3 or 4 days from now, you're coming back to kill Levkov and Reynolds. Know what that means? It means that the entire force will be panic-stricken. I'll rule the entire city. A reign of terror. Understand?
You're insane, LaRue. You can't get far. You'll be in the chair before the year is out.
The detective steeled himself against the shock he knew was about to come. The needle sank into Lane's bared arm. LaRue's eyes dilated. The plunger was slowly pushed home. Lane felt the bulge of fluid underneath his skin.
That's that. As much as I'd like to watch you die, I can't. I have business much more important than you. Morton.
The green mask turned away. LaRue walked across the room and stepped through the door, holding it open for Dawn Drayton. The girl stepped through without a backward glance. The room was plunged into darkness.
And now, we leave you alone in the dark to die.
Alone in the dark to die. Terry Lane stared ahead of him, waiting, trying to be calm, trying to retain his reason. He thought about the case, thought it would be a closed chapter to him now. Tonight, Kramer would strangle Morton to death at his home. That he would die was horrible enough in itself, but worse than that, his corpse would walk in death. His hands, cold and clammy, would strangle the life from his chief and his friend. He would become a horror in the city. And then he became conscious of the silence. The silence would mean that Morton was about to die. Morton, to whom he had talked that afternoon. Some way, somehow he must get free. And then he sickened as he realized that his remaining minutes of life were few. That nickel-plated syringe. The door clicked and swung open stealthily. Lane tried to look in that direction, but could not. Blackness was still about him. Then the icy white beam of a flashlight bit into his eyes, blinding him. Lane moaned. Why were they about to torture him further? Dawn Drayton's voice came to him.
Lie still. You'll be free in an instant.
Her fingers were working at his bonds.
Oh, what's the use?
Plenty of use. You're not dead. There was nothing but water in that syringe. I put it there myself.
You mean it?
Of course I mean it.
But hope lagged as Lane realized that this must be just another ruse.
Why are you doing this for me?
Her face came into the light. Her eyes were hard.
I have reasons of my own. Reasons that have been driving me on from the first. I can't tell you now. There isn't time. I'm risking my life now as it is. If LaRue ever learns that I helped you and that I put water in that syringe... But let's not think about that. I don't have a gun for you. You've got to get out of here yourself.
But why are you doing all of this for me?
Because I want Dr. LaRue caught. I hate him. He's a fiend and a murderer.
No gun. A drum beating in the distance, a fiend still in his path. But for the moment, Terry Lane was free. He didn't consider the odds. He was in debt to the girl, and he would have to try and repay it by getting out of this place alive. The detective strode forward into action. As he plunged down a dim corridor, a phrase ran through the detective's mind.
I have come to kill you, Morden.
Some way, he must stop that murder. A door presented itself, and without pausing, Lane kicked it open. The mad, whirling strains of a jazz band hit him full in the face. He stopped and looked ahead, and this, then, had been the source of the drum. There was nothing ominous about a jazz band. He was in the Club Haitian. The detective ran swiftly to the entrance, lanced through the door, raced out into the street. A cab was cruising past at low speed, and Lane leaped for it.
The Morden residence, and step on it.
The driver gave Lane a wide-eyed stare and then stepped all the way down on the accelerator. The toneless phrase rang incessantly in the detective's ears as he watched the streetlights whip past.
I have come to kill you, Morden.
One scene was before him, the unfocused eyes of the dead Kramer. Lights from the Morton residence glowed harshly through the blackness. Cold stone steps were under his feet, and he ascended them 2 at a time. In spite of himself, he could not evade the hand of fear that clutched at him. A premonition came over him that he was too late. No, not too late. A hideous scream blasted the scream in the silence of the night. The front door was open. Lane sprinted into the deserted hallway. Another scream came from the top of the stairs. It was a race against death. Up there, Kramer. The detective thudded up the carpeted flight and whirled to face the room on his left. He saw the back of a man, the back of a coat from the grave. Kramer was slowly approaching the bed where Morton cowered with terror-stricken eyes. Lane rushed forward, stepped into the room to be savagely clutched from behind. He tried to wrench himself free, but the arms held fast. Some invisible person was holding him powerless. Kramer was plodding machine-like toward the bed, hands clutching out before him. Morton's palms were held out, supplicating, pitiful.
I have come to kill you, Morden.
Don't come near me. You're dead, man. Get away from me.
Kramer did not seem to hear. His steps were relentless, leaden. His sunken eyes bored unseeing before him. His face was putty-like in death. The hands were clenching and unclenching hungrily. Morton was sobbing, racked with terror.
Kramer! Kramer!
I have come to kill you, Morden.
The convulsing hands stabbed forward. Claw-like fingers met about Morton's throat. The banker was jerked to the floor. Kramer slowly pressed the body down. The dead man's hands and eyes were glassy and terrifying without expression. Seconds lagged by. Then the murderer dropped Morton and stood up, carefully turning toward the door. Morton's head rolled limply. Lane kicked viciously, furiously back with his heels at the shins of his captor. He knew that something would happen in a moment. The arms came away from him suddenly and whipped him around. Lane was sent spinning over against the wall. Flames spat at him from the captor's gun. A slug whined away from the plaster. The detective gained his balance and darted to one side. Lane leaped for the stairs and went down 4 at a time. Between 2 fires, the detective jumped into the living room and turned to send a shot into the ranks of his attackers. The gun clicked empty. A moment later, he found himself out of the house and running through the backyard. Bullets kicked into the turf about him. He vaulted a fence, lit running, and made for the nearest telephone, even though he knew that the house would be deserted before the police could arrive. That is, deserted, except for the body of Morton, killed by the dead hands of Kramer. Back at headquarters, Lane's chief detective said,
It's fantastic. Fantastic. weird and ridiculous. If I didn't know you better, Lane, I'd say you were lying.
Yeah, you'd think I was lying if I suddenly walked up to you and choked you to death?
What are you trying to do, eh? Scare me?
No. But you wouldn't be so doubtful if my dead body walked into your office.
How about it, Reynolds?
Reynolds took his pipe out of his mouth and put his feet down on the floor. Absently, he tapped the pipe against the gleaming emerald on his finger.
All I can say is, I pronounced Kramer dead, and he looked like he'd stay that way, too. Even had embalming incisions on his chest. Lane's men got his fingerprints and found them again on Morton's throat. When I say a man is dead, well, he's dead.
Yeah, he's dead. But how do you account for Kramer's coming back, then?
You're both full of bull. I won't believe dead men walk until I see it with my own eyes. It's just an old hocus pocus. I've got records right now which state that over $1 million have been extorted from prominent men in the city during the last week. If you let this thing keep up, Dr. LaRue will own the whole darn town.
Well, you're right about that. I've traced every possible lead, and there's no answer. The thing is driving me crazy. Say, Reynolds, you've been to Haiti, right? Dig up all the dope you can on zombies for me, will you?
The jangle of the phone interrupted them.
Hello? You know who. No, I'm sorry, I don't. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I guess I'm kind of upset. Where? Across the street from... I get you. 7:30. You got it. Gentlemen, Loop Guru is going to be in the bullpen not later than 10 tonight.
If he isn't, you can turn in that shiny badge, and I mean it.
And if he is, I'll turn it in anyway for a lieutenancy.
As per Don Drayden's orders, Detective Sergeant Terry Lane stood across from Galt's undertaking parlor at 7:30 sharp. He was alone, in accordance with the girl's request. An arm touched him lightly on the shoulder, and he whirled to see Dawn's beautiful face beside him. She was pale, and worry lurked in her blue eyes, but she gave him a reassuring smile.
This isn't any trap, and with a little luck, we'll be able to wipe the slate clean.
Rue is coming to Galt's tonight?
Yes, he's coming with a dead man at 8 o'clock. We'll have to be on hand before that time if we expect to connect.
All right. Fireworks can't start too soon for me.
The detective reached up and gave the window a tug. It responded and slid silently open. He boosted himself up and crawled inside. The odor which greeted him was far from pleasant. He reached down for the girl's hands and pulled her up into the room.
Now, sit down, wait for our friend.
We'd better hide ourselves. It's almost 8.
What's better than one of these coffins? Lord knows there's enough of them around. I know it's gruesome, but that can't be helped. It's the last place they'll look.
I hope so. Let's use the ones that are standing up. I couldn't stand the thought of lying in one.
All right. And don't worry. I'll be right beside you.
He closed down the lid. The detective looked about him and then chose a casket which leaned against the wall in the shadows. He stepped inside and closed the lid upon himself. Through the glass window, he could command the room with his eyes, if not his gun. The entrance door was opening slowly, and in an instant there appeared Luke Garou, dragging a corpse. Galt, the undertaker, the maniac's henchman, and Dr. LaRue passed through the outer room of the building and approached the embalming chamber.
Come on, let's get this thing on the table and get to work.
He again snatched at the dead body they bore between them. Roughly, they threw the corpse on the white table of the embalming chamber. From within the coffin, Lane grimly laid out his plan of action. He did not know the identity of the dead man, but he correctly supposed that it was a cog in another murder-extortion scheme. He was half-minded to attack the two waiting men, but stifled the impulse. He would wait until Luke Garou had finished his unknown task. With the breaks, Lane thought, he could control the situation with a minimum of rough work. And then it became suddenly apparent that the brakes were not to be with him that night. The bottom of the coffin was sliding gradually out from the wall. He thrust out the lid with a sudden jerk. It was this movement which caused his immediate undoing. With a dull scrape, the box crashed down. Lane was flat on his back, helpless. The henchman leaped to his feet and ran across the room, gun in hand. Lane saw a gun crash down toward his forehead. Light exploded within his brain, and he slumped dizzily, utterly limp. Loup-Garou kicked his body for good measure.
Throw him into one of the coffins. We'll dispose of him quick enough.
Cold air brought Lane back to consciousness. Cold air and the jolting he was receiving inside the coffin. In spite of the padded sides of the box, each time it jarred, Lane was nauseated with pain. For the briefest space of time, he wondered where he was, and then he knew the detective was in the back of a hearse. Admittedly, Terry Lane was afraid, but then it is said that only brave men can know fear. The thought of being buried alive was not a pleasant one. Cautiously, Lane lifted his head and looked upside down toward the driver's seat. By the light on the machine's dash, he could see the silhouettes of two men. He could hear the conversation of the men in front, and he listened absently.
Where did you put the girl?
In the back of the elevator. She'll be safe there until I can blast her down.
A brittle silence ensued, punctuated only by the jar of the rocketing machine. Experimentally, Lane reached out and touched the side of the hearse. His groping fingers encountered the metal rail along the side, and he gripped it. While he still gripped the rail, the car lurched, and the casket shifted. Lane grunted and pulled again. Slowly but surely, the coffin was sliding down toward the back of the hearse. For some unknown reason, his captors had not strapped the thing in place. The shock of bumps was repeated over and over, and Lane valiantly worked each lurch to his own advantage. The hearse shot up the approach of a bridge, careening under the impetus of the bump at the start. Lane's coffin struck the doors at the back, something gave way, and the bottom of the casket, it tipped crazily and then teetered on the edge. Lane braced himself and drew in his arm, ready for the shock. Empty air snatched at the box. The edge hit the dirt with a scraping crunch. Lane was dazed by the impact, but he was exultant in his freedom. The life of Don Drayton depended solely upon him, even with that bare clue in the back of the elevator to work upon. Lane knew that he would exert every faculty to effect the girl's deliverance. Despite the gaping drugstore clerk and the three customers who stood about in shocked attitudes, Lane dashed to the back of the store where an array of telephone booths stood ready for prospective callers.
Police headquarters.
He snapped into the mouthpiece. Levkov's acid voice answered him presently.
Listen, Chief, I've got a hot lead.
Hot leads? I thought you were going to bring in LaRue.
Give me time. I want you to cover Galt's parlor. Cover the place with about 10 men. Get me? Just arrest anybody who even looks at it.
Sure. And what are you going to do? Pick daisies?
Say, I came so close to pushing those things up that I'm still shivering. I'm going to cable Haiti, for one thing. And I'm going to get a list of every person in this town that's connected to Haiti. If you want me within the next hour, call the coroner's apartment. He promised to have some dope on Haiti for me.
He called up a few minutes ago, wanted to know where you were. He wanted to talk to you.
Okay, I'll be seeing him. I'll be seeing him before midnight.
The druggist shrank back of the counter and stared at the detective with unbelieving eyes. Lane flashed his badge.
Fix me up, will you?
Upon the presentation of authority, the druggist quickly led the detective into the back.
Looks like you've had a tough night, Lieutenant.
Not Lieutenant. Not yet.
He glanced at himself in the mirror over the wash basin. And then the clue to Don's whereabouts flashed through his mind, and his lips grew tight.
All right, just snap it up, will you?
With iodine still burning in the wounds and with his right arm in a white sling, Lane again surveyed himself in the glass. he noticed that the scratch he had received when LaRue had struck his face, it was a minute thing, and long ago stopped bleeding. Nevertheless, Lane gasped as he touched it. He leaned closer to the gas in the glass and stared. A low whistle escaped him.
Boy, I'm dumb.
And then to the druggist, he said,
Thanks, I'll remember this, and if you ever... Well, you see this scratch? If it hadn't been for you forgetting to tie it up, I'd be in a devil of a fix.
And he left the druggist gaping with surprise. Lane flashed his badge to the cab driver at the curb.
Van Metten Apartments, and let her rip.
Within 5 minutes, they were before the lavish entrance. Lane paid the wide-eyed driver and sped into the building. The girl at the switchboard was waved aside, and Lane sprinted for the automatic elevator. He pressed a button and shot up 9 flights to the apartment of Dr. Charles Reynolds. The coroner's apartment covered the entire floor. Reynolds himself greeted Lane.
Hello, Terry. I've been digging up that information for you. I tried to reach you at headquarters, but you weren't there.
I've been busy. Listen, Doc, I want you to compose a cable for me and then get a hold of all the connecting links that this town has with Haiti.
Reynolds nodded. He led Lane into the library and waved him to a chair.
It's a nice place you've got here.
Yes, I like it. Fortunately, I have a private income, or I couldn't keep it going. Oh, anyone tagging you?
I don't know, Doc. This Loop Guru has a habit of turning up every place.
Oh, well, I wouldn't want him wished on me. Oh, by the way, I have been reading up on that subject you asked me to do. There really are such things as, in Haiti, as zombies. The living dead men. At least, they claim to have seen them there. The authors of the books I've read, I mean.
Now, speaking of books, you've certainly got enough of them. Any of these deal with Haiti?
Of course, several. And that's where I dug up the information for you. Have a look yourself if you want to.
Sure. First, we should compose me a cable in French to that pharmacy.
Lane twitched his right arm. It was in a sling. He reached into his pocket with his left hand and brought forth a slip of paper.
I jotted down the address on this.
He handed the slip of paper to Reynolds. The coroner glanced at it.
Just ask for a complete description of Dr. LaRue, will you? If you will, we ought to have an answer in the morning. And there's something else. Compile a list of all the people you know in this town who've been connected with Haiti.
Well, certainly. Glad to help you if I can. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll go into the study and fix up both of these jobs for you. It's my office, and I'll have the cable blanks there. Oh, browse through the books if you like.
He walked to the doorway and then turned around. His emerald ring caught the light and hurled it back. Lane watched him disappear, and then got to his feet and walked over to the shelf. He reached up and extracted 3 volumes. The first was called Voodooism. The second was merely entitled Haiti. The third was the Code Penal of the Republic of Haiti. Quite naturally, since he was an investigator of crime, Detective Sergeant Lane opened the third one first. Through force of habit, he sat with his face toward the door. Article 249 leered blackly at him from the printed page.
Article 249 also shall be qualified as attempted murder.
The creak of a door interrupted him. He glanced up and stiffened. Coming toward him in that slow, lifeless shuffle was a blank-eyed corpse. A crawling sensation went up and down Lane's spine, and for an instant he was held immovable by the terrible sight. He knew now the horror which had been Morton's and Gordon's and Burnham's. The hands stabbed out for Lane's throat. Like a boxer, Lane ducked. His left fist tightened. He carefully measured the distance to the dead man's jaw and swung with all his might. The long blow arced straight to the dead face. It crashed into the clammy flesh. The man swayed a little, but did not move away. The hands shifted and came on. Lane snatched at the wrists, pushed them away. Up came his knee. The vicious jab caught the dead man in the groin. Still, the thing was on its feet. Its strength was horrible. A sob caught in Lane's throat as he realized the hopelessness of the situation. With the deadly purpose of an automaton, his attacker was forcing him back against the mahogany desk, bending him with weight and strength of a thing not to be denied. Lane struggled, striving desperately to get free of the thing's horrible clutch. The cold, clammy hands caught at his throat. He felt them squeezing tighter. His breathing became more difficult. And then suddenly, Through a hazy blackness, half conscious, he felt those talon-like fingers release their grip as the power of animation suddenly seemed to leave the living dead man. The wilting figure dropped to the floor with a thud, to remain there still and motionless.
My God! What is that?
Cried Dr. Reynolds from the doorway.
Why, it's a dead man.
Yes.
Lane breathed, leaning weakly against the desk.
A dead man. One of your dead men, Dr. Reynolds.
What?
You're under arrest, Loop Guru. Under arrest for attempted murder, murder, accessory after the fact.
Oh, you're mad, Lane.
Mad, am I? I've got the goods. I've had it ever since I glanced into a drugstore mirror. I wanted you to come out in the open, and you did. It's the chair, Reynolds.
The doctor's eyes gleamed fiercely. His hand blurred up at his side and came up smoking, spitting flame, but Lane was not in range. He had moved sideways. A round, burning hole appeared in the end of the sling. Dr. Reynolds collapsed, rolled over, tried to bring up his gun, and the hole in Lane's sling grew larger. The doctor's gun leaped out of his hand.
Now that ought to hold you. Where's Dawn Drayden?
You'll never find her.
Don't you move. I've got you covered.
He hitched the sling and then patted out the fire which his powder flame had started. He grinned suddenly and set to work securely tying the doctor in an overstuffed chair. The detective walked quickly from the apartment and then approached the elevator. He stepped inside, leaving the door open. Lane entered the room beyond, holding the sling away from him and covering any possible source of danger with his hidden gun. But he need not have troubled himself, for the room was empty, save for the bound and gagged figure of Dawn Drayden. Lane gave her a reassuring smile and then began to work at the knots which held her gag in place. Oh, the girl's eyes were suddenly peaceful.
I knew you'd come. I didn't even lose hope when LaRue came for a dead man.
The detective released the ropes about the back of the chair and then helped her to her feet. She stood shakily, rubbing her chafed wrists. And then with a small cry, she threw herself into his arms.
There's still work to be done. Now, where's the doctor's laboratory?
In there, I suppose. I saw a white table when he opened that door.
Lane stepped into the second room, stayed there for a moment, and then came back with a wicked-looking syringe.
Come with me, Dawn. I've got Reynolds strapped to a chair out here.
Together, they went into the library. The coroner still writhed, glared about him, but Reynolds glared no longer when he caught sight of the nickel-plated syringe.
You wouldn't. You can't. You're an officer of the law.
That's got nothing to do with it. I'm going to pay out a little justice. If you go to trial, it'll be your word against mine. You, the coroner. Maybe they wouldn't even believe me, Reynolds. If I tried to tell them what a fiend you really are, you might escape. But you'll never get away from this.
He stabbed the flesh with the needle, his thumb on the plunger.
Stop! What do you want me to do?
Talk.
And talk fast.
I want him to tell you. That's what I've wanted from the first. I hate him. Perhaps you'll understand when I tell you that 5 years ago, this man, this monster in human form, was in Haiti. He was plotting then, planning to use zombies, living dead men, to do his rotten work for him. I was in Haiti with my brother. Jim was weak, easily led. Dr. LaRue, as he called himself then, became friendly with my brother. Then later, Jim apparently died of fever, just as the secretaries of these rich men have died. It was not until later that I realized that Dr. LaRue had killed my brother.
Good Lord, and he made him into a zombie?
No, he tried, but then he had not learned enough about it. His efforts were not successful. Perhaps I should be glad that Jim was one of the victims Dr. LaRue did not have walk again.
Oh, but there are others. Perhaps we may still be able to help them if we learn how this Loop Guru has placed them in their half-dead state.
He can help them. That's why I gradually worked my way into his confidence. It wasn't easy for me to do, hating him, loathing him, yet I hope to be able to help the others by pretending to be his aide, to be able eventually to turn him over to the police.
I see.
You see, I have pretended that I knew nothing of the real cause of my brother's death, but always he was watching me. The first time you saw me, said you were going to take me to headquarters, I ducked behind a cab standing at the curb. I didn't dare go with you then, for he had seen me.
I wondered what the deuce had happened to you.
Oh, make him talk, or else make him one of them. Make him suffer as he's made these men suffer, have been walking around dead.
Talk.
Lane's thumb pressed on the needle sticking into Reynolds' arm.
All right. You'll find the formula in the upper drawer of that desk. The chemicals are in my laboratory. I swear they are. With those, the men can be brought back to normal health. Any doctor can do it.
Go look and see.
It's here, and I think he's right.
Now then, I want the full particulars. Quick.
Well, I learned it in Haiti. There was a certain drug that creates a state of suspended animation for a few hours. Remember, as coroner, I was the one who examined those men and pronounced them dead. Even those who supposedly died of the fever. Well, I knew they weren't dead because I had given them the drug each time.
But they were buried.
No, they weren't.
Reynolds glanced at the point of the syringe, still sticking in his wrist.
Only they're empty coffins. Galt, the undertaker, was working with me. He arranged that. He was the man at the car with me when you hit me and thought you had knocked me out. But you didn't hit me as hard as you thought. I got away.
Yeah, never mind that part of it now. What made these men into zombies?
A second drug, which affected their brains, left the men in a semi-hypnotic state. They have no will of their own, but carry out any given order.
Where did you get these drugs?
Well, there was a Papaloi, a voodoo priest who owned a drugstore in Port-au-Prince. I stayed with him, and, well, he liked me. He swore me to secrecy and taught me how to mix and use those drugs. That's why I was so anxious to get that pharmacist bill. I had my men knock Dr. Kaler out after I thought I saw you give him the bill that I had dropped when I examined Gordon. I was looking for it when I came back for my gloves.
You left those notes written in green ink for me, of course.
Yes, well, Kaler had a photostatic copy of the bill. But that was no good to me. I had to get the original before you wired Port-au-Prince and got my description.
Just what I thought. That's why I came here and asked you to get that description of Dr. LaRue for me. I thought you would come out in the open then, and you did, by sending one of your living dead men to kill me.
Dawn looked at the detective and then shuddered as she gazed at the still figure on the floor.
How about this man? What stopped him when he tried to kill me?
Well, I hurried. Failed to give him enough of the drug. Well, he isn't dead, just in a state of suspended animation. There is an antidote that will bring him fully back to normal life.
The phone rang, and Lane answered it. It was Chief Levkoff calling.
You say you've got Galt and the others? Well, now come up to Reynolds' apartment and get Loop Garou. Yes, Loop Garou. Better bring some men with you.
Lane smiled grimly at the bound figure in the chair.
Yes, Reynolds is here.
Lane put down the phone. He picked up one of the books from the table and swiftly turned the pages. And then, half aloud, he read,
Article 249. Also shall be qualified as attempted murder the employment which may be made against any persons of substances which, without causing actual death, produce a lethargic coma more or less prolonged. If, after the administration of such substances, the person has been buried, the act will be considered murder, no matter what result follows.
There are zombies in Haiti. I've seen them working in the fields at night.
Lord, I'd certainly hate to have been a detective there.
He glanced down at the ring on Reynolds' hand.
You got that ring in Haiti?
Yes.
The coroner looked at the emerald.
Well, you certainly slipped up in wearing it. Left a print on my jaw, see? That's the print of the green serpent. You left your seal on me, Loop Garou.
Then, that's how you knew. Well, why didn't you arrest me sooner?
Thought I might have to kill you. If I wanted the information about the living dead first.
He lifted his head as he heard the wail of siren in the street.
That's Chief Levkov and his men. My job is over. No, not quite. Where are the dead men?
Lane moved closer to Reynolds, the syringe in his hand.
In the back of my laboratory. I had them chained there. Oh, for God's sake, be careful with that syringe.
Oh, that? It's filled with water. Took the tip from Dawn here. She did the same thing to me. That's why I'm not one of your walking dead men now.
Livkov, Dr. Kaler, and his head bandaged, and a number of uniformed men burst out of the elevator and charged into the library.
Where's the loop guru? And what's Reynolds doing tied up like this?
There's the loop guru, the elusive Dr. LaRue.
What? That's impossible.
He's admitted everything.
It required a man with medical knowledge.
Right, Doctor. There's a list of drugs here on this paper. You'll find those living dead men all chained in Reynolds' laboratory in the back of the elevator. If you can mix up the works, we'll come back to life in a hurry.
Interesting. I always did want to know that formula. All right, Lane, I'll get to work at it at once.
Yes, sir. I'd sure hate to be a detective in Haiti.
They are nicer here.